Hey, Algebra 2! Today we're going to talk about the graphs of sine and cosine functions. Well, I've made a table here for you so you don't have to do the work. Isn't that nice? I've listed a bunch of radian measures, and we're going to find the sine of those radian measures. So if you were to plug into a calculator, make sure it's in radian mode, the sine of 0 radians, you end up with 0. The sine of pi over 6 is going to be 0.5. The sine of pi over 3 is 0.87. The sine of pi over 2 is 1. The sine of 2 pi over 3 is 0.87. Sine of 5 pi over 6 is 0.5. Sine of pi is 0. The sine of 7 pi over 6 is negative 0.5. The sine of 3 pi over 2 is negative 1. And here we have negative 0.5. And lastly, the sine of 2 pi is 0. So these, if you think about it, these are going to be our y values when we graph. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to graph in green for fun. Okay, so we're going to plot these values. These are kind of like your x values and your y values. So when x is 0, your y is 0. Here, when it's pi over 6, your y value is 0.5. When you have pi over 3, it's 0.87, so that's more than halfway between 1/2 and 1, so it's about here. And notice, that's like way offline. And notice I did these in terms of pi over 6. 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, and so on and so forth until we got to 12 pi over 6, and then reduce the ones that I could. Now, pi over 2 is going to be up at 1. Okay. 2 pi over 3 is 0.87. This one's going to be 0.5. Pi is going to be 0. 7 pi over 6 is going to be negative 1/2 or 0.5. 3 pi over 2 is going to be down at negative 1. Okay. This one's at negative 0.5. And 2 pi is going to be 0. So now, if you were to connect the dots, you notice that this is actually what they call the sine wave. Okay, this is the sine wave. They're not straight lines. It's an actual wave here. What happens, it repeats itself over and over. So the sine function actually doesn't stop. It keeps going over and over and over. We just put limitations on it. We said we're going to graph 0 is less than or equal to theta, which is less than or equal to 2 pi. So we just did one full cycle here. Again, it would just keep repeating itself over and over. So we say this is one full period. Okay. So this is what the sine wave looks like. The big ones I really want you guys to memorize. It's going to be good to know all of these, but the ones that you really need to memorize is 0 all the way. So a full cycle, halfway is at 0. A quarter of the cycles is up at 1. So pi over 2, it's up at 1. And then 3/4 of the way, it's at 3 pi over 2. These are the 5 dots you really need to memorize, okay? The 0, the pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Okay? This is, if you memorize these 5, then this will help you tremendously as we continue on with graphing trig functions. So sine, this is the graph of sine. Just original sine from 0 to 2 pi. Okay, so now let's move on. Let's do cosine. So now the graph of cosine. So, cosine is going to be a little different here. We're going to start up. This is going to be at 1. If you were to plug that in your calculators, this is 0.87. This is 0.5. This is down at 0. 2 pi over 3 is going to be at negative 0.5. 5 pi over 6 is at negative 0.87. Pi is going to be at negative 1. 7 pi over 6 is at negative 0.87. 3 pi over 2 is actually going to be at 0. 11 pi over 6 is going to be at 0.87, and 2 pi is going to be at 1. So if we were to graph this, again I'll go green. when x is 0, your y value is 1. At pi over 6, it's at about 8.7. At pi over 3, it's up at 1/2. At pi over 2, it's at 0. At 2 pi over 3, it's at negative 1/2. 5 pi over 6, it's at negative 0.87. At pi, it's at negative 1. Let's fill in the rest of the graph here. Okay, 3 pi over 2 says it's at 0. This one's going to be almost up to 1, and then this will be up at 1. So if we were to connect the dots, you notice here, this doesn't look exactly like sine, but it's still a wave. Really, it is the graph of sine just shifted a little bit. Okay, so this is what the graph of cosine looks like. Okay, so again, there's the 5 points that I really want you guys to memorize. The 5 points are where it begins. It begins up at 1. It ends up at 1. So 0 and 2 pi. Begins and ends up at 1. Halfway through at pi, it's down at negative 1. Okay, that's the other one I want you to memorize. And then the pi over 2 and the 3 pi over 2, notice they're both at 0. Pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2 are both at 0. So these are I say there's 4 intervals here. So there's the first interval from 0 to pi over 2, second pi over 2 to pi, pi to 3 pi over 2, and then 3 pi over 2 to 2 pi. So if you memorize these 4 intervals, what it looks like for cosine, then this will help you tremendously. So this is the cosine wave as opposed to the sine wave. Notice sine begins, middle, and ends at 0. Okay. Here, this one begins and ends at 1, and halfway it's at negative 1. Okay. So these are the 2 functions, main functions that you're going to have to memorize, and we will do more work on this in the next section. All right. Good luck.